politics aside, it seems like there are even, let's say, Russia and the U.S., there are people in the U.S., mostly from the from the right, that seem to be parroting the exact same Russian propaganda points that are coming out. And so now you're seeing a mainstream politician who, for people of that party, would trust, and they're parroting these things that are seem to be coming from the FSB or the Kremlin. And it's hard to kind of decipher now what is real and what's not. And if you have a very busy life, and all of us have like our phones that we're probably more attached to than we'd like to be, we have all these different touch points of things we're looking to every day. And at the same point, we're trying to do our own filtering of information. Like, it does seem impossible because the world's already a pretty complex system, and our limited human brains can only process so much. So if you happen to be in this bubble, or someone you trust happen to fall into that bubble, then they're telling you that these things are true and they're not. Like, I don't know, have you seen, in these disinformation campaigns, like how we can avoid to fall into these traps? Because most people are not full-time researchers.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of why we do what we do, is to point those things out so that we can bring those to light. And I think it's helpful to understand, why these operations are carried out, what their goal was, because it helps the people that may be on the fence or kind of skeptical about it, if they're hearing disinformation, just kind of go, okay, that's why. So, right. But as far as pulling folks out, there's a whole bunch of sociological studies going on right now about you see Vice articles and different things coming out about like how to talk to your MAGA uncle, or how to talk to, pull your family member out of QAnon and stuff like that. And it's like, right. Some folks have started to create kind of like more step-by-step processes to just start, because you can't get emotional about it, right? It's one of those things. Those folks typically want to draw you into an emotional debate. For sure. So you just basically have to show little things that you're just kind of like, irrefutable evidence in some cases is what they're going for, but you'll still get just a response of like, well, I did my own research and it turned something up differently. And so what's super dangerous about the times we're living in is kind of the idea of like, what is truth? How do you discern truth from non-truth? And the day that we really stop listening to like scientists and doctors and people who have spent their entire careers and lives dedicated to this one particular issue, and somebody online, that's done 2 hours of research, quote unquote, can just say like, nah, not for me. I don't believe that. It's just kind of like, that's a little bit scary, because we're just in a place where we understand that the experts don't always have it all figured out, but they still know better than you and I do when it comes to something like,
right. Well, I think that was part of the catalyst, because I wanted to start this podcast or show a long time ago just for fun, and never found someone who wanted to partner up. And I think I finally pulled the trigger, because there are so many voices out there that I've been hearing that are actively trying to spread disinformation and misinformation, and they're so loud, and a lot of their followers are so certain about these things that they're not experts in, and they would never be able to know. And so the idea that I really wanted to help propagate is that like we should all be more curious and less certain about things, especially when we're not the experts. Like, I don't have a degree in virology. I don't have a degree in cybersecurity and all of these things. And so I think like through this hierarchy of academia and experts, like we have to understand, sure, there are experts that are going to get things wrong. There are experts that, maybe they're just not good at their job. But the majority of the collection of evidence, I think we have to say, like, okay, this body of individuals as virologists or whatever, this is what their consensus is. And so if I'm going to disagree with it, like the hubris on that, I think is so enormous. And so I don't know, with with like all these misinformation campaigns that we're seeing going all the way back to Trump, I think you hit it on the head, where like now, how do we have these conversations? And the only thing I found is empathy, because I've really tried over the years, even through COVID, is to, engage friends and people that I think were going down certain rabbit holes. And it was never to say that I know better than you. It was to kind of say like, neither of us know, maybe we should listen to people that do know, that spent their lives knowing this. And so like, even I remember one Christmas I was at a family, pre-COVID. I think it was just after Trump won, and we have one cousin from the U.S. that came back to Canada, and I love this guy to death. He's one of my favorite cousins since I was a little kid, and he's become very pro-Trump. And so we had this like very lively debate in the living room, and like a political science cousin, myself, and a couple other people poking the fire. But what it came down to is that like we would be listening to the points that he would bring up to us about Trump's going to do this, and this is why he's okay, and even though we didn't agree, we're arguing back saying, yeah, but there's this part of evidence, there's that part of evidence, Trump is this and that as a person, and all these things are clear. And his response would just be like, oh, but you heard that from the mainstream media, you heard that. So at one point we kind of had to stop and say, like, why is it that like all of your evidence is evidence and all of our evidence is fake news? Like there's clearly something going on here. And I think at some point you have to realize, okay, is the topic you're discussing more important than the relationship, or is the relationship more important? Because something like Trump, especially if you're in America, it's definitely more, incendiary for all the things that he's done. Whereas at least I've seen in Canada, when people get into these conversations, I only go so far, and then I'm like, okay, like this is really going to become damaging to our, the love between us, and the empathy will never come back. But it was something like, let's say abortion. I've seen a lot of people be like, no, like women specifically, like, no, this is an existential threat to my life and other women. And so they've started drawing lines to be like, no, like our relationship is kind of contingent on this issue now, and they've started drawing serious lines. And I think that's the hardest part. I don't know if you've experienced any of that.
Yeah, I definitely have, and I think that it's kind of, I mean, I hate the term, but some folks have coined it, like the post-truth era, and the idea is that basically, like, the damage that was done was essentially that we just eroded the foundations of where we kind of base truth off of, and the idea that, like, yeah, sure, the media is something to blame for that, and the news cycles being 24 hours and just always having to one up and get the news out faster. There's definitely some blame there, but it's also just this idea of, like, again, like the hubris and the folks just thinking like, yeah, I know better than this person who has literally spent 30, 40 plus years sometimes,
Right,
like studying this one issue, and you're sitting there on your couch or wherever just saying like, I know better. So it's that.
or when they're wrong,
Of,
they use it as a gotcha to be like, oh, they were wrong. So they were wrong about everything. And we were like, well, that's kind of not how this is not how this works. Like there's an evolving body of information that we're trying to flow. And they play like Monday morning political scientist, or, scientist in general.
You know what the answer is to me? I mean, I say this as like an analyst, is basically like, as an analyst, what you learn to do is essentially like synthesize a whole bunch of information, like ingest it, and then pick out, key factors and timelines and different things like this that you're just kind of like all putting together to maintain like a cohesive narrative about like why, in my case, like a cyber operation happened. But in order to do that using, analytic techniques that have been perfected since World War II, I think is when a lot of these were kind of founded by like the UK and CIA specifically, writing all of these intel techniques, which are basically like how to think about thinking while you're thinking, and check your biases, check your sources of information for veracity.
How to think about thinking. All right.
Yeah. and it's complex stuff, because it's basically like I can put out my research, but I mean, part of putting out good research isn't just being like, that's it, I found the culprits. It's like going back, and then once you have your hypothesis about, I think it's this particular unit in China, like, can you go back and with a critical eye against your own work, or have somebody else step in to say like, hey, yeah, I mean, that's a little far-fetched. Like, don't you think you should like find something else that kind of props up that hypothesis or proves that that's true? Right. And so sometimes you do get through a product and just realize like, this isn't as airtight as I thought. I need to go back, examine my bias that I had towards this, and reframe, my hypothesis to be something different. And so
Right.
I think that the rest of the public could actually use, some schooling on stuff like that, because it kind of teaches you how to do that sort of stuff. And so one of those things is like when you're having an argument, it's still based off of, I think, Greek philosophers and like how to have an argument, and it's logical fallacies. You learn about the ways that people structure an argument to support what they're saying, and that what you see with a lot of the MAGA QAnon folks is just like it's like people that maybe just didn't have the wherewithal or knowledge to do this before, but Trump taught them like the basics of like straw man arguments and like how to like prop something up to make their argument just seem like the best thing in the world. And it's like you almost need training in those logical fallacies to just be like,
Right.
you can point it out. You can just like watch, some of these news programs and just go, boom, okay, that's that logical fallacy. That's that logical fallacy. And you
Sure.
can basically pick apart somebody's argument that way. And then, hopefully you're using your powers for good, and then have a counter argument that doesn't rely on logical fallacies. And it's just like scientific research paper, this, here I showed my work.
Right.
And they can still at the end of the day just be like, oh, that's fake news or whatever. But you're just like, I have done more than you to prove this, like this
For sure. Well, I think the last aspect of that I was just reading an article on last week is that the key about communication is that both parties having to be, open and willing to change their mind and, to try to assimilate data to get something that is, towards the truth and not be playing teams. Like I know, for example, I've got really frustrated in conversation over the past couple of years based on, politics or COVID, where I try to step lightly. And anytime I'm having these conversations, I try to understand their perspective, even if it really is the polar opposite of mine, the antithesis of what I believe, to see like, what can this person teach me? And I try to find some sort of common ground. So perhaps we can, find somewhere where we agree, since we know no one's gonna flip on this. It's obvious pretty early. But I always find I'm trying to find common ground, and someone who's trying to engage authentically and with goodwill, normally we can find something, and we can kind of change some sort of belief systems a little bit. But I've seen many people, like, they're really just, they take my goodwill as in like they're winning and changing my mind, and then they don't want to really engage. They want to keep pushing the crazier points of their system. And I've just learned to like, okay, like I think we've reached an endpoint here where, we've done our best to try to explain our points of view, but it seems to be getting quite combative. So maybe we should just, watch Rick and Morty and forget this, this political or scientific conversation.